The waves rolled in soft and constant, brushing the pale sand like a heartbeat Evelyn had always known. She had invited her daughter here. One last attempt to close the distance between them, to rebuild something before it vanished for good. But when Lila arrived, she didn't see the ocean or the love in her mother's eyes, only the peeling paint of the beach house and the rusted gate that creaked in the wind. Evelyn spoke with a quiet hope, offering tea, memories, and warmth, but Lila's tone carried ice. "You still live here?" she asked, scanning the room as if disappointment were furniture. The silence that followed was heavier than the tide. Evelyn's heart sank as her daughter turned away, heels crunching against the sand, leaving her mother standing alone, clutching a teacup that still trembled with warmth. Evelyn sat by the open window long after her daughter had gone, the hum of the sea replacing every word she wished she'd said. She remembered when Lila was little, how she'd run through those same sands barefoot, chasing shells and laughter. But years had built a wall money couldn't mend, one of pride, resentment, and the belief that love was measured by status. The tea had gone cold now, and so had the house. Evelyn exhaled, not in anger, but in ache. Somewhere between holding on and letting go, she whispered a quiet prayer to the waves. Please bring her back one day, when she remembers who she is." In another part of town, Lila scrolled through her phone, her manicured fingers reflecting off the screen's glow. Her friend Chloe laughed beside her, sipping champagne as they lounged by a pool that wasn't theirs. "You've got to stop feeling sorry for her," Chloe said. "People like that choose small lives." Lila smiled faintly, but something inside her flickered. A memory of a simpler time, a mother's embrace before ambition hardened her. The laughter around her was hollow. She glanced at the sea in the distance, its blue horizon whispering something she didn't want to hear. That evening, Evelyn walked along the shore, her feet sinking into the wet sand as the tide receded. The beach was nearly empty now, just her and the whispers of seagrass in the dusk. She remembered the promise she'd made to her late husband, to protect what they built, to pass it down when the time was right. She had wanted to tell Lila everything that morning, about the resort, the investments, the legacy waiting quietly under her name. But pride had stolen the moment. Evelyn looked out at the vast water and smiled softly through tears. Some truths, she thought, were best revealed by time, not words. Back in her car, Lila drove away from the coast, headlights slicing through twilight. Anger swirled into guilt into silence. She turned on the radio, but every song reminded her of her mother's voice, calm, patient, forgiving. She hated how that voice lingered even now, as the resort signs passed by Carter Shores, Ocean View Retreat. She never noticed the shared name. Her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, blind to the truth that her mother's love and her mother's empire stretched beyond the horizon she had just left behind. Morning arrived, draped in silver mist. Evelyn awoke to the low hum of the tide and the ache of an empty house. She made coffee, poured it into 2 cups by habit, and then hesitated. One for her, one for a daughter who no longer sat across the table. The quiet pressed close, thick as grief. She walked through the rooms, touching frames that once held laughter, brushing her fingers across furniture her husband had built by hand. Life, she thought, was cruel in how it takes away sound before it takes away love. Yet beneath her sadness something resolute stirred. A small, stubborn flame that whispered, "Not yet." Later that day, Evelyn visited the resort grounds, a ritual she kept hidden. She walked past manicured gardens, smiling at the guests who didn't know the quiet woman in linen owned everything around them. She liked it that way. Power, she had learned, meant nothing without peace. Daniel, her manager and confidant, joined her on the boardwalk, his expression both respectful and protective. "Shall come around," he said softly. Evelyn nodded but didn't answer. She wasn't waiting for apology. She was waiting for time to teach. Across the city, Lila sat in a glass office surrounded by success she could barely afford to keep. Her company, built on image, charm, and borrowed time, was beginning to crack. Chloe leaned across the desk, whispering promises of investors and shortcuts. But Lila's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She saw her mother's eyes in her mind, the kind that never needed to prove worth to anyone. For a fleeting second, pride faltered. Then the phone rang and she put her armor back on. "Let's talk numbers," she said, masking fear with confidence she didn't feel. That night, Evelyn sat on her porch as rain began to fall. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and gray, like watercolor sadness. She held a letter she'd written months ago, words meant for Lila, words she'd never sent. She read them aloud softly, her voice trembling. "You may not understand the choices I made, but every brick, every breath was for you." The rain drowned her tears, and for a moment she let them fall freely. The wind carried her whisper into the night, as if somewhere, somehow, her daughter might hear. At the same hour, Lila returned home to her apartment, a place filled with designer silence. She poured herself a glass of wine, scrolling through old messages she never answered. A reflection in the window caught her off guard. She looked older somehow, lonelier. The rain outside tapped against the glass in rhythm with her pulse. Beneath all the noise of her world, ambition, vanity, performance, a single ache remained. She missed her mother. But pride, that invisible chain, kept her from reaching for the phone. She turned away, pretending not to care, even as her eyes betrayed her. The morning sun broke through a thin veil of mist as Evelyn stepped into the resort's central courtyard. Guests were already gathering, smiling, sipping coffee, admiring the calm sea. No one paid attention to the quiet woman walking among them. No one knew she was the one who built all this. She paused by a marble plaque near the fountain, engraved with her late husband's name. Her fingertips brushed against the letters, and a faint smile formed. This was their dream, born from years of struggle, saved penny by penny. She had chosen to live humbly, to let her daughter believe she'd lost everything, because Evelyn wanted Lila to learn value, not vanity. Today, though, as she watched new investors arrive, and Daniel greet them proudly, she wondered if fate was preparing to reveal her secret before she could. Daniel approached later, clipboard in hand, his steps quiet against the marble. "The new investors from New York are coming this weekend," he said. "Should I handle it, or will you want to meet them?" Evelyn hesitated. She preferred to remain unseen, the invisible owner, the silent benefactor. But lately, whispers had begun circulating about who truly held the deeds. "Let them believe what they like," she replied softly. "I've had enough of proving myself." Daniel nodded, though his eyes held worry. "One day," he said, "shall know the truth." Evelyn smiled faintly, turning toward the sea. "When she's ready," she whispered, her voice carried by the salt wind. Meanwhile, Lila's company was cracking beneath its glossy surface. A contract fell through, a payment delayed, and her so-called friend, Chloe, stopped answering calls. Lila sat in her office, surrounded by trophies of borrowed success as panic crept in. Pride had always been her armor, but now it was a cage. For the first time in years, she felt small, the kind of small her mother must have felt, the kind of small she had mocked. When the news came that her lease was being terminated, she stared out at the city skyline and whispered, "Maybe I was wrong." The words tasted like salt, the same kind her tears once came from. That evening, Evelyn hosted a quiet dinner for her staff, something she did every few months to remind them they were family, not employees. Laughter filled the courtyard as candles flickered under the open sky. Evelyn sat at the edge of the long table, smiling softly at their joy. Daniel raised a toast in her honor, calling her the heart of Carter Shores. And though few knew the truth behind the name, they clapped sincerely. She felt tears rise, not from pride but from gratitude. In every face she saw a fragment of what she and her husband had built together. For a fleeting moment she forgot the pain of loss, until she glanced at the empty chair beside her. Night deepened, and Evelyn lingered alone on the terrace after everyone left. The waves crashed below, steady and familiar. She walked to the edge, gazing out at the moonlit sea. Her husband had always said the ocean hides its treasures beneath stillness, just as she hid hers. But even still waters eventually reveal their depths. In the distance, lightning flickered across the horizon, foreshadowing change. Evelyn closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, "If she ever returns, let her find me not as her mother, but as the woman she misjudged." The storm rolled closer, and somewhere in the dark, fate began to stir. The city no longer shimmered for Lila the way it once did. Deadlines blurred into debts, and calls from investors turned cold. Chloe, the friend she trusted most, had vanished after siphoning funds from their joint account. Lila's confidence cracked like glass. Every reflection showed a stranger who'd traded love for illusions. Sitting in her penthouse with the lights off, she finally realized what she'd done. She'd chased validation, not happiness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rain against her windows. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not for failure, but for everything she'd lost trying to seem unbreakable. Days later, Lila received an email from a resort management firm, an offer for a short-term consulting role at a coastal property desperate for help. Pride screamed to ignore it, but hunger silenced pride. She packed quickly, tossing her life into a suitcase too small for regret. As her train left the city, she stared at the blurred landscape outside. Fields, rivers, the first glimpse of sea. She didn't know the resort's name yet, didn't care. All she wanted was a place to breathe again, far from the wreckage of her own making. Little did she know, she was heading straight into her mother's world. When she arrived, the sea air hit her like memory. Salt, wind, and something painfully familiar. The resort was breathtaking. Palm-lined paths, marble lobbies, the faint scent of lavender in the air. Lila checked in at the front desk, introducing herself under her company's fading name. Daniel was there, reviewing schedules. Their eyes met briefly, his gaze calm but curious, as if he recognized something unspoken. He offered a polite smile, unaware, or perhaps perfectly aware, of who she was. Lila felt uneasy, sensing she'd stepped into a story she didn't fully understand. That evening, Lila walked along the beach, the same stretch she'd once stormed away from years ago. The sky glowed in hues of rose and amber, the sea whispering stories she had long refused to hear. She closed her eyes and felt the sand beneath her feet. Familiar, grounding. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like running. Somewhere nearby, Evelyn stood on a cliffside terrace, watching the sunset from her porch, unaware that her daughter was only a few hundred yards away. Two silhouettes, mother and daughter, both looking at the same horizon, neither knowing they were finally sharing the same light again. That night, Lila sat on her balcony overlooking the ocean, her laptop open but untouched. She could hear faint laughter from a dinner party below, the sound of family, of belonging. It stirred something inside her she thought she'd buried. She didn't know the woman hosting that dinner was the same mother she'd abandoned. Down below, Evelyn raised a glass, smiling at her staff, unaware that her daughter sat just above her in the guest wing. Destiny had closed the distance between them. Now all that remained was the truth. Morning sunlight spilled across the resort's courtyard, gilding the palm leaves and the rippled pool. Lila stood by the reception desk, reviewing guest records for her temporary assignment. Every few minutes she'd glance toward the ocean, distracted by a sense of déjà vu. The air smelled like her childhood. Salt, jasmine, and something that reminded her of her mother's perfume. Down the corridor, Evelyn appeared briefly, her stride slow but graceful as she carried a tray of fresh flowers to the lounge. Their paths crossed for only a second, a shared glance, polite smiles between strangers, yet the world seemed to pause. Neither spoke, but both felt something familiar stir deep within. Daniel noticed the tension that morning, the subtle glance Lila gave, the soft stillness in Evelyn's movements. When he found Evelyn later in her office, she was staring out the window, lost in thought. "That new consultant," he began carefully. "She reminds me of you." Evelyn turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Maybe that's why I can't stop looking at her," she admitted quietly. "There's something about her eyes." Daniel hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Would you like me to find out her name?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No," she whispered. "If fate intends us to meet again, it won't need help." Lila spent the afternoon touring the property, taking notes for improvements. The gardens, the villas, the quiet hospitality. Everything radiated care. She felt strangely humbled walking among staff who spoke of the owner with deep affection. "She saved this place," one gardener said, trimming blossoms along the walkway. "Her husband built it, but she gave it life." Lila smiled politely, but her heart twisted at the mention. A woman who gave everything for love. It sounded too much like her mother. She brushed off the thought, convincing herself it was coincidence, yet the feeling refused to fade. Later that evening, a storm rolled over the coast. Rain lashed against the villa windows as guests hurried inside. Lila stood in the open veranda watching lightning flash across the ocean. It mirrored her mood, beautiful and violent. When Evelyn entered quietly, umbrella in hand, she offered a towel. "You'll catch a cold out there," she said kindly. Lila turned, startled by the stranger's warmth. "Thank you," she replied softly, studying her face. Something about those eyes, that voice. Evelyn smiled, the way only a mother could, though she said nothing more. They stood side by side in silence, two souls unknowingly reunited under the same roof, their hearts echoing the same storm. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She wandered the empty halls of the resort, her footsteps soft on marble floors. In the lounge, she found a notebook left open on a table. Neat handwriting, careful notes about operations, ideas for staff welfare. At the top, a name was printed in pen, Lila Carter. Her breath caught, the world tilted. The room suddenly seemed smaller, the air thinner. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. After years of silence, destiny had brought her child home. Not through forgiveness or plan, but through grace. The morning broke heavy with clouds, the kind that hold both rain and truth. Evelyn stood on her balcony, gripping the notebook she'd found, her daughter's handwriting still trembling in her hands. Down below, the resort buzzed with its usual rhythm, unaware that history was about to crack open. She wanted to run to her, to hold her, to ask why. But fear kept her still. Too many years of silence had built walls around her heart. Finally, she whispered to herself. No more hiding. With steady steps, she left her room and walked toward the lobby where fate waited, dressed in coincidence and courage. Inside the conference hall, preparations for a weekend investor gala filled the air, champagne, linen, and anticipation. Lila reviewed logistics with Daniel, unaware her mother was only steps away. "You've done wonderful work," Daniel said, his tone kind but cautious. "The owner will be attending tonight. I think you'll find her surprising." Lila smiled politely, hiding her exhaustion. "I've met enough wealthy people to know surprises aren't my thing," she replied. Yet something in Daniel's look unsettled her. His eyes, usually calm, flickered with a secret he couldn't keep much longer. That evening, guests arrived one by one, dressed in elegance and expectation. Lila moved among them with practiced poise, her smile professional yet hollow. The event began with music, soft laughter, and the clink of champagne flutes. Then the host was introduced. Lila turned toward the stage and froze. Evelyn stepped into the spotlight, graceful and unassuming in a pearl gown. The announcer's words echoed through the hall. Founder and owner of Carter Shores, Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The world fell silent. Lila's breath caught. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. Every suppressed memory, every harsh word came crashing back like waves against the shore. The room blurred into silence. Evelyn's heart pounded as she saw her daughter standing among the guests, pale, trembling, eyes full of disbelief. "Mom?" Lila's voice cracked like glass. Evelyn stepped down from the stage, ignoring the whispers around them. When they met in the middle of the room, time seemed to stop. Lila's words spilled out. Anger, regret, apology tangled together. "You let me think you were nothing." Evelyn touched her cheek gently. "So you could learn what everything means." Tears filled Lila's eyes as she fell into her mother's arms. No applause, no speeches, just the sound of forgiveness echoing beneath chandeliers. Later, when the guests had gone and silence returned, Lila and Evelyn sat by the shore outside the ballroom, shoes in hand, toes buried in the sand. The sea murmured softly, forgiving as it always was. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lila asked, voice small. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want you to love me for what I had. I wanted you to love me for who I am." The waves broke gently against the shore, carrying away the last traces of bitterness. Lila leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "I wasted so much time." Evelyn shook her head. "No, darling. You just took the long way home." Dawn arrived like a benediction, pale gold spreading across the ocean's edge. The resort was quiet, its usual bustle still asleep beneath the hum of waves. Evelyn watched from her balcony as Lila walked down the shore, barefoot, her figure small against the rising sun. Every mother dreams of her child finding their way home. Evelyn never imagined it would be like this. Born not from pride or success, but from loss, love, and grace. She stepped outside, her heart steady for the first time in years. Today wasn't about secrets or forgiveness anymore. It was about beginning again. They met again by the water's edge, where everything had first fallen apart. The same sand, the same sound of waves. Only this time, no anger lived between them. Evelyn carried a small wooden box, the last piece of her husband's legacy. She opened it and handed Lila the deed to the resort. "It's yours now," she said softly. Lila stared, disbelief breaking into tears. "I don't deserve this." Evelyn smiled. "That's how I know you're ready for it." The ocean wind wrapped around them like an embrace, the tide erasing their old footprints, leaving room for new ones. The day moved slowly, filled with soft laughter and stories long overdue. Lila listened as Evelyn spoke of her father, the man who dreamed of turning their love into a haven for others. "He built the walls," Evelyn said gently, "but you'll fill them with life." Lila nodded, overwhelmed by a quiet pride she'd never felt before. She looked around the resort, the guests, the gardens, the waves, and finally saw what her mother had always seen. Not wealth, but purpose. The kind of legacy that doesn't fade when the sun sets. By evening, the resort buzzed with gentle life again. Children laughing, glasses clinking, waves rolling in rhythm with music from the terrace. Lila stood before the gathered guests, nerves trembling but heart full. "This place," she said, voice breaking slightly, "isn't just my family's legacy. It's proof that love doesn't die when people disappoint each other. It just waits." Evelyn watched from the back, her eyes shimmering with pride. When Lila finished, applause rose, soft but genuine, like the ocean breathing approval. The circle had closed. When night returned, The beach fell silent again. Stars mirrored in the black water. Evelyn and Lila walked side by side along the shoreline, hands brushing, laughter mingling with the whisper of waves. "I used to think wealth was about what I could own," Lila murmured. Evelyn smiled. "And now I know it's about what I can give." They stopped where the tide met their feet, the same place where pride once tore them apart. Evelyn looked at her daughter, tears glinting in her eyes. Whoa. "Then I suppose I've given you everything." The sea swallowed their footprints as the camera drifted upward, leaving only two shadows walking beneath. A sky full of forgiveness.